Hello, my lovely listeners. Welcome to Sinister Obsessions. I am your host, Hannah, and this is the true crime podcast that talks about all true crime in the Far East. I also talk about hauntings, myths and legends, and anything spooky that I can think of that goes on over here in Asia. I'm so happy to be back with you after my 2-week break. And in today's case, we are traveling to Hong Kong to discuss yet another brutal and disturbing murder. I'm extra excited to talk about this one today as I am traveling back to Hong Kong in literally 2 days' time, just for a quick trip. So what better timing than to do a Hong Kong episode? It has been a while since we've done one of those. Despite the gory and the juicy details, though, of today's case, it is also a very tragic story. A young man's parents were murdered in a very cruel and traumatic manner. So listener discretion is advised that this case covers the topics of mental health and shares explicit details of the sinister murder. Before we continue, don't forget to follow Sinister Obsessions on Instagram, give a subscription on YouTube, and a follow, download, and rating on Spotify. I am also on Amazon. I would greatly appreciate a little bit more ratings. I get a lot of support from my followers on Instagram, but the ratings on Spotify would be super helpful, especially if I'm going to consider any sponsors in the future. Thank you and love you guys. So let's get straight into this case today. This is the microwave murders. It's nothing new that plenty of families across the world are estranged or have challenging relationships amongst siblings and parents. But have you ever heard of a son hating his parents so much because they forced him to take piano lessons when he was a child that he decided to murder them so that he could be reborn? This unsettling story tells a tale of how a young man named Henry Chau Hoi Leung and his friend Angus Tse Chun-Kei plotted to murder Henry's parents, pretended that the couple went missing on a trip to mainland China, whilst they slowly dismembered the bodies, microwaved, boiled, and hid parts in lunchboxes in the fridge of the same apartment where the couple were murdered. Hong Kong, as many of you listeners know, is one of my favourite places on this earth and what I used to call home. We're heading to a little area on the Kowloon side today of Hong Kong called Tai Kok Shui, a suburb near Mong Kok if you are familiar with the area. Tai Kok Shui is definitely part of the older Hong Kong, and just like any other area in Hong Kong, especially in Kowloon, the narrow streets and high-rise buildings are constantly buzzing with vibrancy. If you have not been to Hong Kong before, try to visualize walking down an incredibly crowded and narrow street with cars whizzing by, the sounds of the crosswalk bleeping, tall buildings sporting multi-colours of old brown, pink, yellow, green, with cramped old windows and laundry hanging off them, and aircon boxes hanging onto their last breath. Each street corner in Hong Kong is sizzling with local snacks, steaming in your walkway like spicy fish balls, roasted sweet potatoes, stinky tofu, and super budget friendly. You either really love it or you hate it. I mean, in Hong Kong in general, the whole environment, it's utter chaos. And I still can't compare it to anywhere else in the world. Maybe parts of Tokyo and Seoul, but Hong Kong is wildly unique. So the main culprit of the case today is a man named Henry Chau Hoi Leung, and he was born on June 7th, 1983, in Hong Kong and was 29 years old when this case happened. He lived with his elder brother and parents in a flat in Sai Ying Pun, which is on the main Hong Kong island. According to Henry's friends, he has lived in his own world ever since he was a child. His friend, who had known him for many years, said that Henry resented his parents because his parents forced him to learn piano when he was in elementary school. This is something I think most of us were brought up, probably required to do, or play some sort of instrument, or do some sort of sport, right? It's not out of the ordinary. Yes, we probably despised our parents for this. I know I did when I was forced to do tag rugby, but I didn't think about murdering my parents. Anyway, in secondary school, Henry also failed to keep up with his academic performance due to emotional problems. He had difficulty getting along with his classmates and failed the Hong Kong Certificate of Education examination. Later, his parents actually arranged for Henry to study in Australia. During this period, he claimed that he suffered discrimination and bullying many times, as well as the experience of being beaten by black people every time they saw him. After that, Henry did return to Hong Kong in 2003. This was during the SARS outbreak and when the milkshake murder happened. He would not express his thoughts to his friends, and his personality was relatively withdrawn. So the second defendant in this case is a guy called Angus Tse Chun-Kei, who is of Macanese descent from his father. If you are Macanese, you are a native or inhabitant of Macau, especially one of mixed Chinese and Portuguese descent. A friend of his actually recalled that Angus had a gentle and pure personality and that he even dated his sister. Later, Angus went to New Zealand and met a woman, but was cheated on, and she cheated money out of him as well. So obviously he was absolutely devastated, and he returned to Hong Kong in 2010, and he actually tried to commit suicide 3 times at home by burning charcoal, taking rat poison, and swallowing mercury. His sister rescued him when she returned home in time on the last attempt. However, he suffered permanent brain damage from this, slowed on the uptake, and had poor memory because of all of these attempts. Later, Angus's mentality was to muddle through his days, which is just devastating. These are also very painful ways to try and take your own life, and his poor sister, for finding him in this state, has obviously suffered deeply too. So it was 2013 when things took an incredibly dark turn in the little flat in Tai Kwok Shui. Henry was intending to move out of the apartment with his brother and parents and into his friend Angus's apartment. Little information is shared about how he roped his friend into this whole act or what Angus would gain from this involvement, but apparently money was the reason. It was about 5 days before the murder, on the 1st of March 2013, when Henry told his parents that he would move to Angus's flat. He asked his parents to come and help him move in and tidy up the place. He lured his own parents into Angus's flat with a brutal plan waiting ahead. CCTV caught the older couple entering a building with their son, and that was the last time that they were ever seen alive. Henry then brutally murdered his parents inside the flat and left somewhat 20 minutes later. This is when Henry tried to come up with a plan to pretend that his parents had just gone missing without him knowing anything that happened. He went back to the flat in Sai Ying Pun, where his brother was, and proceeded to tell his brother that he thought their parents had gone to mainland China for a trip. His brother, Chau Hoi Leung, started to feel a bit strange about the whole thing, especially after a few days had gone by and he had no contact with their parents. He thought it was really weird that they would just take off to mainland China and not even tell him. Henry then decided to accompany his brother to look for his parents everywhere in the city. They even appeared in a video to appeal to the public for help. A report was then made to the police about their disappearance. So now we're on March 12, 2013, 5 days after filing a missing persons report. The 2 Chau brothers heard from the police that there were no departure records of their parents leaving Hong Kong. Obviously, Henry did not think that through. Thus, on 13th of March 2013, Henry and his brother then decided to approach Apple Daily, claiming they had not heard from their parents since the 2nd of March. Henry stated that before their disappearance, his parents had informed him that they were planning to travel to mainland China. I don't know where he thought his plan with this was going because, like they said, they could obviously find records of travel, but didn't. They actually then created a Facebook page together, the 2 brothers, called My Missing Dad and Mum, and asked their friends and public for any information that could link to their parents' whereabouts. They're so delusional and crazy to try and keep that up, knowing exactly what happened, and to imagine the poor older brother who was worried to death, thinking something bad might have happened to his parents, when it did, and it was by his own brother. Meanwhile, what was going on in that apartment with Angus? So on the 14th of March 2013, Henry was actually invited to the police station for further questioning. Apple Daily released articles about the Chau brothers' struggle to find their missing parents. However, for some reason, during the police interview, yes, during, Henry WhatsApped his friends in a group and his cousin, confessing to the whole crime. He even described the details and the reason for the murder. On the 15th of March 2013, a day after the interview, Henry and his friend Angus were indicted for killing and dismembering Henry's parents in Angus's Tai Kok Shui flat in the Hoi Leung building. As officers approached the apartment in the building, they smelt death and bleach and entered a blood-stained apartment. Henry claimed that he and Angus coordinated the attack the moment his father, Glory Chau, and his mother, Moon Soo, arrived in the living room because this was the time when they felt ready. Henry described his friend Angus as very powerful. He covered his mother's mouth from behind while he slashed her throat. Henry admitted to stabbing his father in the back of the neck, but stated that Angus had finished the job by slashing his father's throat as well. After Henry had left the apartment and tricked his brother into thinking his parents were missing in China, he returned to the Tai Kok Shui crime scene 4 days later, after the incident, at the time when Angus had already dismembered all of the body parts, salted, refrigerated, and demoisturized them. Which I don't know how he knew how to do all that. 4 days though. 4 days Henry just disappeared and allowed his friend to do all his dirty work for him. It's horrid to even imagine this. Henry then described his role in the double murder as killing only, while Angus dismembered the bodies. Again, leaving his friend to dismember his parents over 4 days. Can you believe it? The horrific thought of it all, despite hating your parents, over bloody piano lessons and probably a lot more. But you've got to be in another world to so viciously attack them like this, like your poor mum and dad. The horror that would have unfolded that day in that apartment is unimaginable. Now we're getting into a little bit more of the gory part that gives the episode this title, The Microwave Murders. So we're getting into the dismemberment. Listener discretion is advised if you have a weak stomach. According to Henry, Angus initially attempted to disguise the remains as bricks by covering them with cement and sand in the apartment. However, when this plan didn't seem to work, he then came up with an easier plan to cook the remains of the bodies and try to disguise them as char siu, barbecued pork. The remains that had already been covered with sand were thrown into the sea, and the rest was salted, cooked on a stove, boiled, and microwaved. I can't even imagine what that would smell like. I don't want to know, but it's just a thought that crossed my mind. The heads of the 2 victims were found inside 2 separate refrigerators, and the remaining body parts were placed into little lunchboxes with rice to disguise the bodies. When police discovered the scene, they found those refrigerators, lunchboxes containing the microwaved human flesh, and 3 bags containing chopped limbs. According to video interviews shown to the jury, Henry said that his father was an arrogant man who left him without a moment of peace, while his mother always looked sadly at Henry when he did not contribute to the family. Henry said, "I thought that if I could resolve the emotional connection with my parents, it would be a solution, but if they died, I could be reborn." He blamed his parents for his failures in life, such as his father distracting his studies by watching television at a high volume, and his mother forcing him to practice the piano and apparently humiliating in front of a girl on his 24th birthday. This case actually also reminds me of 2 other cases I have previously researched for this podcast, which were, of course, the Hello Kitty murder, where a poor girl was tortured for a month in an apartment in Hong Kong by 3 triad members, high on meth after she stole money from one of them. She eventually succumbed to her injuries, and they chopped up her body and hid her head inside a giant Hello Kitty mermaid doll. If you want to know more about that, please listen to my very first episode on season 1. The next case that this reminds me of is a way more recent case, and I'm sure many of you might have heard of it, but the Abby Choi case that happened in Hong Kong only last year in February 23. Famous model and influencer was murdered by her ex-husband, chopped up, and her head was boiled on the stove in a giant soup pot, along with her other remains. Again, this episode I did cover in season 1, but what the fuck is going on here in people's minds? Not only to believe that they could, A, get away with this, like, Again, I'm sure you're not in the right mental state or frame of mind at all when you're murdering somebody, but to genuinely believe that you could dismember a body, chop it up and dispose of it and get away with it, it's to disregard a human in such a repulsive and sickening manner, especially a family member, is what to me makes you not human at all. It's beyond. Now, it is no secret that there is a huge stereotype when it does come to how things are within Asian households. Not to say that this isn't the case with many other cultures and families across the world, but from living in Asia for many years now and speaking to local friends, they have expressed how it is quite common for a lack of emotions to be present within the family, saving face, no mental health discussions. Now, this was likely the case for Henry Chau. We don't know the extent of what really went on in his childhood, apart from the minor details that have been shared. But to kill your parents and have your friend chop them up, pretend they are missing, we're talking about a very dangerous, dark, and truly psychotic person here. So the trial began their first hearing on the 4th of August 2014, and both Henry and Angus as the defendants. Prosecutor Michael Arthur warned the jury that the case was gruesome and distasteful in nature, and argued that the accused were motivated by money to commit the crime. Apparently, after the murder, Henry made inquiries about his parents' bank accounts and shareholdings. The initial jury of 7 was reduced to 6 during the first week of testimony. Soon after, another jury member actually asked for dismissal due to the psychological stress burdening him. And you remember, they're probably shown pictures of the crime scene and shared a lot more details than I'm probably sharing with you now. On the 13th of August 2014, High Court Deputy Judge Michael Stewart Moore announced that the case would have to be restarted with a fresh jury of 9. So they must have seen some horrific imagery for, 2 members to leave and for it to restart. It's crazy. So the trial resumed in February 2015. Henry's defense argued on the basis of diminished responsibility due to his mental instability, while the prosecution stressed the meticulous planning of Henry Chau and his multiple confessions. On the 9th of March 2015, the defense lawyer Nicholas Adams called psychiatrist Chung Ka-Fai to the stand. Chung diagnosed Henry with bipolar disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Chung stated that Henry had experienced many suicidal thoughts after dropping out of college, being rejected by women, and being unemployed, giving a possible psychological trigger for the murder. The consultant of Sealam Psychiatric Centre conducted an IQ test for both Henry and Angus. Henry's IQ was found to be 126, which was higher than average, while Angus's IQ is 84. Liu agreed the possibility that Henry, having such a higher IQ than Angus, could have manipulated and framed Angus for the murder. After all, Angus had suffered brain damage and a lot of mental health conditions from his multiple suicide attempts. Angus had denied playing any part in the killings, and he said Henry had showed him a box containing a human hand and other body parts before warning him that it would be hard for Angus to convince people that he had not helped to dismember the bodies. So, again, a lot of blurred lines there with what happened during the murder and the dismemberment of the bodies. Who was solely responsible? Obviously, I do believe it's Henry, but how much did Angus really contribute? And did he also actually take part in the murder or just the dismemberment? Anyway, the pair had planned the murder for roughly 6 months. Computer records from Henry showed that he researched for information about missing people and for blood-taking methods in October 2012. He prepared a shopping list to buy knives, saw blades, bleach, fridges, and a microwave oven. He also took action to purchase the items piece by piece on alternative days in January and February 2013. Angus claimed that Henry killed and dismembered the couple in his own flat without his knowledge. Henry had threatened to harm his mother, so Angus felt compelled to help him pack and throw some of the body parts into the sea a few days before their actual arrest. Henry told psychiatrists that he wanted to achieve something important before he was 30, as he felt he would fail to do so. He planned to commit suicide if he would not achieve anything. Henry alleged that when he told this plan to Angus in 2012, Angus was the one that actually inspired him to kill his own parents and to just kill other people instead of killing yourself. In Henry's original plan, he was going to kill his brother too. Apparently, he then wanted to travel to mainland China and kill women and prostitutes and become a serial killer with a partner. Which, yeah, pretty believable, I think. He also told a psychiatrist that he listened to a Russian composer, Alexander Scriabin's piano piece, Vers la Flamme, continually for 30 days before he killed his parents. And apparently it enhanced images of flames in his mind that he believed would signal the impending end of the world. There's a lot going on there in Henry's mind. He then confessed to his cousin that he believed he was a psychopath and could only remember the bad sides of people. He proceeded to say that when he killed his parents, he did not worry about their death. He was scared as he was overwhelmed by the amount of blood he saw. But after killing, he only cared about a cut that he was suffering from himself during the struggle with his father. So he went to the hospital for treatment straight after the murder. And apparently he felt relief when he saw his parents' empty bed the next day, that's just so devastating. On the 20th of March 2015, the verdict was passed. High Court Deputy Judge Michael Stewart Moore found Henry guilty of double murder, while finding his accomplice Angus not guilty on both counts of murder. Henry was sentenced to life imprisonment, while Angus was sentenced to 1 year for preventing the lawful burial of the bodies. As Angus had already been detained for 2 years on remand, he was actually released immediately. Stewart Moore also gave Henry an additional 9 years and 4 months in prison for preventing the lawful burial of his parents, which he admitted earlier the sentences would be served concurrently. Wow. I mean, again, not the first time I've heard of a disturbing and disgusting case like this, but when it's just a direct biological family member, 2 of them, that's just is devastating, like I said. And sometimes when I research these cases, it really just makes me think, like, death is death. We all understand death. But sometimes I just find it so insane to think that that person was there 1 minute and literally the next, they're chopped up, they've been microwaved and then put into lunch boxes with rice. Like, it's just beyond. And I know this is sharing a lot of gory, gruesome details with you guys, but I cannot believe that sometimes that's that person. Like, how could he have processed his thoughts normally? Like, in a lunchbox is literally your mum and dad. Like, it's just horrendous. Like, there's no words. That's what I mean. I can't find a word beyond the word evil or barbaric or disgusting or inhumane, because again, how can it be 1 minute you're alive, you're walking, you're breathing, you're talking, you're doing your job, and the next minute you're fucking barbecued like your pork and then put into a container with rice? It's just, yeah, beyond unlawful. But that was our case today, and I hope you guys found some interest in that. Funnily enough, I actually hadn't heard of that case before. I thought I had covered every single Hong Kong case that I could, especially living there and having this mild obsession with all the true crime acts that happen out there. But yeah, this one was a new one. I hadn't heard of this one, and it's not too long ago and just as brutal as many of the other ones. And next week I will be back with you guys, and I'll give you a little sneak peek of the episode. We will be discussing the most recent case of the cyanide poisoning in Thailand. So stick around for that one. All right, guys, have a good rest of your week. I will be in Hong Kong for a few days later this week. Give me any more ideas if you want some more cases to be heard on this podcast. But for now, thank you very much, and bye-bye.